For more insight, we are now joined by Stephen Zunes, who's professor of politics at the University of San Francisco, who's speaking with us from Philadelphia. Nice to see you, Professor. First up, let's get your reaction to the deal. Of course, the families of the hostages will celebrate any shred of hope after 2 years of war. But what about you as a foreign policy watcher?
Well, certainly this is a positive development and long overdue, and it's frustrating that in many ways I think both sides could have come to an agreement much earlier and saved an enormous amount of death and destruction. But this is certainly a positive development, most immediately for the hostages and their families, but also, of course, for the Palestinians in Gaza if it holds. And that's the big concern I have, actually, because this is just the first phase, and at least for the hostages, the long overdue, is really the only leverage Hamas really has. And given that Hamas abided by the first phase of the original ceasefire agreement in January, only to have Israel break it with U.S. U.S. backing, and then engage in the heavy bombing subsequently, it raises concerns about whether Israel will be willing to have a permanent ceasefire, or they'll simply resume the bombing once the hostages are free.
All right. It's early days, of course, but if the deal holds, President Trump will likely point to this as the crowning foreign policy achievement of his second term. But so many unknowns lie ahead, like you mentioned, about stages to come, whether the 20 points don't go wrong. How should the president tread this early stage?
Well, I think he's recognized that he has had the power to end this war, as did President Biden. I mean, we've seen presidents from Eisenhower to Carter to Reagan to Obama end Israeli military offenses and force them to pull back. Because the United States has an enormous amount of leverage on Israel. It always has. But I think Trump finally was willing to push Netanyahu because he was getting pressure from other nations around the world. The U.S. was increasingly isolated at the United Nations, from global civil society, massive protests around the world. You had the outrage at increasing Israeli atrocities like the attack on the hospital and the double tap operation that killed the journalists and the rescue workers. And you have and he's also feeling pressure from the Emiratis and the Saudis, with whom he has close economic and military and personal relations with, who are saying, hey, we've pressed Hamas as far as we can go. You need to press Israel as well. And I think he finally got the message to assert some leadership here. And I think we may see it paying off.
Okay. Positive reaction trickling in from the international community, which, like you say, has become more vocal on this issue in the past month, at least. How much pressure is there on the success of this deal, given that the world is really watching now and very vocal about it?
Well, yeah, I think what many in Israel were realizing is that, 2 years ago, the whole world was united in support and sympathy for Israel after suffering this horrendous terrorist attack. And Israel ended up blowing its political capital, to put it bluntly, that they 2 years later, they're an international pariah. And, you have mass protests that aren't only criticizing Israeli policies, but you're actually seeing downright anti-Israel and anti-Zionist narratives going more and more into the mainstream in some places. And I think a lot of Israelis are saying, the losses to our reputation and all that goes with this, economically, strategically, culturally, and other ways, it just doesn't make up for whatever little strategic advantage one might gain by continuing to bomb and bomb and bomb and bomb, especially since 80% of the casualties are civilians. So I think I think this is in many ways a hurting stalemate, that both parties found that they were losing, and it was really, really time to try to stop the bloodshed, at least for now.
All right, let's talk about the possible future scenario. President Trump says that the U.S. will be involved in keeping Gaza peaceful. Professor, what could this involve? Boots on the ground, a multilateral approach, or how do you see it?
Well, the best way to stop extremists is have a representative Palestinian government that has some relative autonomy, that is not under siege, that is not under occupation. Indeed, Hamas only had the support of 15% of Palestinians back when the Oslo Accords were signed, but the failure to establish a viable Palestinian state led many to give up and to support extremism and terrorism. So what has to happen is not just physically rebuilding Gaza, which is going to be a massive undertaking, but also, ensuring that Palestinians get to govern themselves. That this kind of trusteeship they're talking about with Donald Trump and Tony Blair, that given the reputation of the U.S. and Britain in the Middle East, that is not going to last very long until the Palestinians have true representative leadership, and it's not going to be Hamas. Most Palestinians agree with that as well, but it has to be a leadership that really the people respect, and that can lead them to eventual independence. But the ceasefire is going to have to hold. Indeed, the redevelopment itself is not going to happen if the potential investors fear another war is going to break out at any time. So first and foremost, the ceasefire really does need to hold.
That's the political future, but what about physical reconstruction? President Trump's plans for Gaza are for the Strip to be rebuilt into a different world, that there will be wealth spent there. That's what he said on the phone after this was announced. How realistic is this vision of his? How appropriate is it, given the level of death and devastation? 50 million tons of debris, which could take up to 20 years to clear, and decades of rebuilding. What do you have to say, Professor?
I mean, looking at the devastation, it looks like Warsaw or Manila or Dresden or the heavily bombed cities of World War II, and it's going to take quite a bit of time and quite a bit of money. And his vision of paving it over, basically, and building this Mediterranean resort, and that is clearly not going to happen. Indeed, I think the international community and the continued resistance of the Palestinians made that impossible. But it's going to have to be a place where obviously the basic social services can be met. See, already, even before the war, Gaza was under siege. I mean, Israel was already strictly limiting construction material and many of the basic services. So they're already in kind of bad shape. And now with the physical destruction, it's going to require an enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of work and input. But it can't be a kind of a so-called disaster capitalism, if you will, where just a few foreign investors make out well. It's going to have to really meet the basic needs of the people there, so they can rebuild their shattered lives.
Well, both the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the IDF seem upbeat after this announcement. Israel will convene the government today to approve it. What uncertainty still exists on the passing of this in Israel, and what's the impact on Benjamin Netanyahu's political future?
There are a couple of far-right ministers who have repeatedly threatened to leave the government if some kind of ceasefire agreement was reached. And given how narrow his majority is in the Israeli Knesset, that could bring down the government. But my suspicion is that some of the more centrist parties have agreed to give Netanyahu cover just to enable a ceasefire agreement to go into effect and to hold on at least for a couple of months. There are many Israelis who've suspected that Netanyahu prolonged the war to prolong the elections that he would likely lose, and then he'd be subjected to prosecution of the multiple indictments for corruption that he is currently under. But I think that the momentum in Israel is very much towards making a deal, and he's going to have a hard time in backing out of that, at least formally. But again, the question is, will he continue to press forward with the peace after the first phase, or will he resume the war? Will he withdraw to the extent that he has promised? Because we've seen in Lebanon and Syria, he has not withdrawn as promised in the agreements there. And so there's still a lot of suspicion about whether Israel will indeed follow through.
Thank you so much for talking us through the early stages of this ceasefire. Stephen Zunes, Professor of Politics at the University of San Francisco.